You're listening to the Discussing the Resilient podcast, hosted by Aiden Smalley and William Reid, a competitive 40k podcast for the servants of Nurgle and the fallen 14th Legion. Tactics, meta-analysis, and all things Death Guard.
Hi, so you've joined us for the first episode of the Discussing the Resilient podcast, a podcast that focuses on competitive 40k, but specifically orientated around the faction of Death Guard. Also linking in with the, I suppose, the allied factions, maybe it's a bit of knights, a bit of demons, but talking about them as an allied faction into Death Guard. The reason we've started this podcast is we felt, well, there's a lot of other ones, you know, Sister Battle, I've got the Sister Act podcast, and there's people who've sort of touching on the Death Guard. General Yanis does a great job on YouTube and stuff, but we thought we wanted to focus specifically on the competitive meta, list builds, kind of if someone wins a tournament, or maybe interview them, and just sort of break down and just kind of have general content, sort of, so if there's like a new change in the game and a new faction comes out, or, you know, like we've just had the Arcs of Omen stuff, you know, we'll talk about, but linking just to Death Guard. So without any further ado, we'll introduce a host, because this will be the first time you spoke with us. So listen to us, I suppose. Can't interact with us. So you heard him laugh there. So the man himself, Aiden Smalley, 2022 season No.1 Death Guard player in the world, according to the ITC.
For now. LVO pending.
Well, yeah, I suppose someone could knock you off the top of the LVO. It's unlikely, isn't it?
Well, we'll see. I'm still happy about how it's gone so far, so I'm not too fussed. But yeah, I am currently the rank 1 Death Guard player in the world. Hopefully that leads some, you know, relevance and some credit to what we're going to talk about, and opinions. It's not just like two randomers. Well, it's one randomer and me. I'm joking. I'm only messing. No, me and Will are good friends. Me and Will are good friends. We're both really passionate about the Death Guard faction and taking it to competitive, and, you know, doing as best we can, really.
Yeah, second. I suppose we're rivals at the same time, though. So we're based in Manchester in the UK, and I play on a team called Stonehammer, and or Stone Wankers, as they like to call us, and they play on Manchester Warhive. But we haven't got a nasty name for you guys yet, but we'll come up with one this year.
Yeah, you'll have to get thinking.
Yeah, but we share a passion for Death Guard, and so I play a lot of competitive 40k. I'm usually top 10 in the UK with Death Guard. Top 10 in the UK, of course, isn't #1 in the world. So Aiden trumps me on that.
Know your place, peasant.
That's it. Yeah. I often finish around the top 20, but this year it's not been the best run for me. I don't even know I am worldwide, but I'm a long way off where you are, Aiden. So like I say, I think you're the man of the moment in that sense.
But what matters is you're a passionate Death Guard player and you stick with a faction, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, well said.
And what a good time to start talking about Death Guard, because Arcs of Omen has just dropped.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, I suppose that might be a good thing for you to sort of lead into then. I mean, obviously, you know, you were top in the 2022 season, so I suppose maybe start, how did you feel Death Guard sat in that season? What did you think was the strengths or weaknesses? And then going on to that, how do you think the new Arcs of Omen, you know, the balanced data slate, the points, and then the detachment, you know, change of secondaries, obviously a lot's happened. How do you think that's changed Death Guard as a faction?
So I think Nephilim season was actually pretty decent for Death Guard. I think mostly they were actually quite underrated. I think Armor of Contempt was great for Death Guard, and I'm slightly upset that it's gone, but we'll get onto that. But I believe that Death Guard had some okay secondaries. We weren't the best faction in the game, but I think we had enough play to do well in Nephilim against a lot of factions. Coming into Arcs of Omen, it's quite a beast of a change, obviously, with the loss of Armor of Contempt. A couple more free war gear, which was really one of the bigger buffs that Nephilim gave us, with the free war gear and Plague Marines taking a very underused and not so efficient unit and basically supercharging it with about, 80, 90 points of war gear per squad for free. You got a bit wild.
It's a big change, that one, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it opened up those avenues of list builds, which are now, I mean, they're still possible, but I think the the way the game's going to be, because it's not just obviously changes to our army, which we're going to talk about. It's going to be changes to those other armies that we've seen. Just for a quick one, for example, before we go into it, we know Marines have got a lot of free war gear and they're looking to be quite a monster, and then that's scary. It could be scary for us with all those high AP weapons they're not getting for free. But we need to also remember at the same time our biggest predators like Tyranids just got absolutely blasted. Still don't think it's a dead book. I still think, happy with that. I still don't think it's a dead book, Nids, but it's nice to see that our biggest, when you ran it and you got paired against Nids, you were like, oh god. And now we might actually have some play against it, hopefully.
Well, Nids is such a deep book that I think the people who jumped on the faction and don't have deep model collections, I think, probably for them it's maybe over because, unless they really want to run out and buy the new stuff. But I think long-time Nids players, maybe it's people who play Nids like me and you play Death Guard, who've got all the models, I feel there's probably still a build in there. Because that book is so good. It's got so many rules on rules and rules. It wouldn't surprise me even if they maybe creep back to the top of A, or maybe it's into West tier, but maybe it's just around one specific build. I could be wrong though. I'm not a faction specialist on Nids at all. So, hopefully, being very selfish, hopefully it doesn't happen because I'm sick of those books. But if it does, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a good point you raised there, because we've seen going around a couple of big YouTube channels doing tier lists, etc. And with some very hot takes, shall we say. Obviously, no one actually knows because, no one's actually played much Arx of Omen yet. But we've seen stuff like Nids now in F tier, or famous one that everyone loves at the moment, Death Guard in D tier on a certain channel.
Oh, yeah, Art of War.
The only one. So let's just address the elephant in the room right now. Our Death Guard D tier? No. I honestly, and I'm more on the Debbie Downer side of the changes. I know there's a couple of people that are more.
You sent me some messages sort of saying armor contempt, going, you weren't happy about that, were you?
No, definitely not happy about that. And I do feel like we could potentially be hurt more than helped by this. But to say we're the only D tier faction in the game is a little bit of a joke, in my opinion, a bit insulting, and it definitely comes from a place of people that, don't play the faction.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think playing devil's advocate to some of that, I actually, from my side, I felt the lack of armor of contempt was actually quite a big boon in some senses, because obviously Space Marines go at the top of the meta. Fair play, Space Marines now is not Space Marines of the start of 9th edition, because there's probably going to be twice main on the board and they're twice as killy. But one thing that we can do well is kill Marines, so that's one thing that armor of contempt coming back, all our AP2 and AP1, it'll count for something again. But the thing I think in Art of War's defence, I actually agree with you, Aiden. The whole point of starting this podcast is to give people hope and sort of, put our thoughts and opinions into that. But I think Death Guard as a faction, they don't actually have anything that other factions don't do, which is down to GW's game design. Obviously -1 damage when it came, everyone's like, oh, wow, it's so strong. Then how many other armies got it? And it was one of those things, in toughness 5, fair play, it's great, but then there's so much high damage and so many things wound with +1 on the dice that, that's where, obviously Armor of Contempt sort of countered that, but it was also a nerf to us in terms of killing other things. So it's interesting to see how things are going to shake out with that. But I'm with you, I think we're definitely not C tier. C tier was D tier, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was D tier.
I think it's maybe D tier if someone, picks up Death Guard as the very first faction, they know nothing about the game, and their friend picks up, I don't know, Imperial Guard, know nothing about the game.
Oh, God.
Maybe in that sense. But yeah, people with some knowledge and a bit of skill and persistence, I think there's a lot to still be got out of Death Guard, and, hopefully, we'll put some good results up this year. Probably you more than me, to be fair, but I'll wave you from the bottom tables at least.
We'll see. But I think you're right, though. It's a complete double-edged sword with the whole armor of contempt, because, again, if Marines start becoming good, I always felt like if I was a Marine player, obviously before these changes, don't know how it feels now, but if I was a Marine player before these changes in Nephilim, for example, if I got paired into Death Guard, that would be a nightmare for me. That would be like, I do not want to get paired into Death Guard at all. Because from my game experience playing against Marines, we are like their natural predator. It's so easy to kill them. It's kind of funny, and they kind of just bounced off us.
Yeah, very much. So I mean, Blood Angels was always a weird matchup. Had the speed to run around the edges and get to places where we just couldn't get to. But then all the damage is 2. It makes it 1 damage. You take the teeth out the army. So there's a lot of that's going to come back in. I mean, I think Iron Hands is the one where I look at them and I worry the most, because I just think they've got so much long range damage that we're going to struggle to sort of match, I guess. But I mean, this is part of the sort of the conversation, and after touching, I mean, allying in knights and things, that's something I've been looking at already, and I think there's definitely some play there. I know you're a man who loves a Contemptor and a couple of Plague Burst crawlers.
Hot topic.
Yeah, very much so.
But I think there's a overall for Death Guard, and this is another thing to do with lead on from the idea of tier lists. Death Guard have quite a, on the statistics side, low win percentage, and I just want to make people aware that just because an army has a low win percentage doesn't mean it has potential, because Death Guard, contrary to a fair people might have belief, is actually quite a hard army to play, because people will think that, oh, you're just naturally tanky so you can just stand there in the open, but I can promise you and me will both know if you stand some guys in the open, they're not going to be there next turn. Even with DR and T5, it just doesn't happen. So instead, you've got an army that's got a slow movement, which means you can't, and I said this when I was on the podcast for Art of War, that reactions for Death Guard, it's not something we can realistically do. You can't really, react to if you lose one flank of the board. It's just, you just have to accept it at that point, because our speed is so low. But and that requires a play, a plan in your head from the get-go, which is quite hard for sort of a lot of people who are brand new to the game to obviously think 5 turns ahead sometimes. It's a lot to ask of someone, especially when stuff starts going wrong. It can take a bit of tenacity and a bit of resilience to not try and fix the problem that you're not going to be able to, and instead just stick to your guns on your original plan.
I think that's a really good way, because obviously we played recently at a tournament, and I learned firsthand why Aiden's so much higher than me, because my game plan wasn't as solid as Aiden's, and you like you say, you just trudged up and you just moved, and everything was very focused, and there was no point in the game where I didn't feel that you weren't in control. I know it ended up being quite close, but that's Death Guard versus Death Guard. Faction versus faction's always going to be that way.
Had to be me versus you, didn't it?
It made me laugh as soon as I was on the pairing.
For anyone out there who played Death Guard versus Death Guard, that is not a fun game.
Oh mate, it's -1 damage and -1 damage. The weirdest thing is contagions, isn't it? When you roll and you go no, it's a 3, and you're like, no, but I'm toughness 5. It's like, no, but I'm also a Death Guard, so you're toughness 4.
Yeah, I'm so not used to it. I'm just and then your Foul Blight Spawn got out of a Rhino, and he's he's got the -1 AP contagion. I was just oh yeah, shit.
Do you know what? One of last year's, just as a sort of quick sizing, so Rob Catton and Greg Chamberlain were the 2 top last year. So I had a bit of chat with Rob Catton online, sort of through Facebook and stuff, and we actually played at one of the bigger UK tournaments, and it ended up being a draw. But he, at the start of the game, was Death Guard players was joking about how many times people forget about the flight bonders and go, what, he really does that? Literally in that game, and turn 2 or 3, charge into the Foul Blight Spawns on. I was like, so I fight first. Why do you fight first? I was like, come on, mate, we've literally had this conversation.
You're so not used to coming against it though, because you're just used to having it. You're just oh no. But yeah, it was that was definitely an experience of a game for sure. But coming back around to the original point, to answer it in a bullet point, a Death Guard actually D tier, dead faction, unplayable, trash. No, come on, people. You can any player can win anything. Now, I'm not saying you're going to go 5-0. I'm not saying that's going to be happening on the regular. I think that would require an immense amount of good matchup, an immense amount of skill, an immense amount of, luck on those dice at key moments. But to say it's an impossibility is ridiculous, because you could even, even the worst faction at some point, if it was taken by the best player, will chances beat most people.
Yeah.
If you gave 8th edition Guard right now to World Rank 1, I can't remember, is it Vic at the moment? I think it's Vic, is it? It might have changed.
I think it is Vic, I think it is Vic. It's Vic or, I think it is Vic. It is Vic.
So let's say we gave Vic 8th edition Guard, and then we put him against your average 3-2, 2-3 Andy. I'm going to guarantee Vic wins most of those games.
Yeah, I mean, I played him at the last big one I went to. I can't remember, I think it was maybe Coventry. Can't remember, one of the big UK events that we have in this country, run by the London, the LGT guys, London Grand Tournament guys, who run a series. And I ended up getting paired into Vic, and he's one hell of a player. I mean, he was playing Meta Thousand Suns with Flamers, and
Oof.
Yeah, I mean,
Ouch.
I said, I'm going in, I accepted I've lost this, I'm just going to try and play for points and treat it like a team's game and just try and get one out of it. And yeah, Vic's the prime example of someone where I actually felt if I was playing his army and he was playing Death Guard, there's a chance he might have actually beat me. So, like, you know, those players, you're right. And that's kind of what we're sort of talking about, really, isn't it? You know, using sort of like skill within the faction, and, you know, people like Vic, Manny, obviously all the Art of War guys, they're people who know the game really well and they play what's best. But the other side of that is people like yourself, maybe me to some extent, but more you here.
I definitely think you're part of it.
I don't know. I mean, you're always done short though. What I mean is people who've learnt the faction so well that you can treat the faction that you play, and in your hands, it's, you know, an A-tier faction because you know all the tricks. And I think a part of that is probably also studying the meta and other people's armies and just knowing what sort of situations and tricks you can pull off. I mean, that leads quite nicely actually. What do you think at the moment some of the other armies are? I mean, obviously we've mentioned Space Marines, and I think, you know, at this point everyone who's playing competitively knows about Imperial Guard. What do you think are some of the big winners out of the new rules? I mean, you know, given a quick summary, what are you sort of thinking? Because that leads then on to how we might tech and sort of get around those particular matchups.
Yeah, so obviously, we mentioned Nids might be a sleeper thing. I don't think they're dead either. You don't think they're dead, so I think it might take them a little while to find another build, but I think they've still got play. That book is so deep, it's nuts. All it takes is one person to crack that little code, find, you know, that weakness that Marines have, and just jump on it. So I think they could still be decent. I know everyone's just like straight up, they got like, you know, 15 points and they're having a dead faction, but again, people need to understand like knee-jerk reactions, and people who actually like learn the book will be looking at different builds. I think obviously Marines we don't need to really talk about that much. We know they're going to be crazy. We're seeing like stuff like Space Wolf lists with like almost 1,000 points of free war gear, which is nuts.
One thing to chip in there actually on Marines, because going back to the Art of War tier, it was Dark Angels going top. Actually, they're not as terrible into us as other armies because we can get past the transhumer with Discussing the Arch Contaminator. So that's something to sort of be aware of in particular to us. But didn't mean to cut you off there. I just
no, it's good. It's a very good point, and I agree. Yeah, Arch Contaminator for us has actually, I've played against Deathwing a couple of times, and like you got to remember with the Marines, like when we come across these like all Terminator lists, reality is the rules actually haven't changed barely. It's just they have a lot more models in the field, and obviously Armor Contempt's gone for us, but it means it's also gone for them. And with Arch Contaminator, I never really struggled too much into the Deathwing matchup because of all the reroll wounds just kind of beat out Transhuman. But obviously, time will tell if, the extra, 20-something Terminators they can fit in now, which is a bit bonkers to say, and that might cause issue. But,
I mean, I think you weren't there, but obviously me and Aiden both play at a local club as well, and one of the guys there, with the two guys playing Dark Angels, one guy he's not as competitive minded, so he didn't know about the points changes, and he had 2,000 points, and then a friend that we both know, James, he did know about the point changes. He had them with all the Arcs of Omen stuff, and my god, it was literally like seeing the visible before and after of how many extra models on the table. It was mad.
Oh, so bonkers,
that's definitely going to be interesting to see, because I think we can kill them. The question is going to be, can we kill them quick enough? But
yes.
This is what we're sort of discussing.
Yeah, Quins are an interesting one. Everyone seems to think that the 4++, 4 up in 1 to a 5 up in 1 is like dead faction again, but I kind of disagree, to be honest, because let's be honest, a Harlequin squad, like a 5-man squad or a single Void Weaver, a 4 and up is annoying, but I never had a point where a 5-man Harlequin squad lived when I wanted it to die. It's it's 6 wounds at toughness 3. If you want that to die, it should die.
It's the speed, isn't it? I mean,
exactly.
This is where specifically talk about Death Guard, and one of the reasons we're doing this podcast. Harlequins, they're a weird matchup for us. Obviously, we have no problem killing them, and you kind of in the early turns sometimes even feel, it's going all right. We're kind of quite close, but then once they start running round and the attrition kicks in, because the frustrating thing with Death Guard is that we're not as resilient as we should be in the lore. There's a lot of mortal wounds and toughness 5s. You allude to the start doesn't mean so much, and that's where I think Harlequins actually sometimes beat us in the attrition game. I found, because they are very killy. And those troop squads, you're right, they come out, hit something, they kill it. And even with the 4-pin run, they often weren't surviving to live the next turn unless they'd sort of done such a big punch to you didn't have anything to slap back with. So I found you traded quite well for the first 2 or 3 turns, and then the turns 4 and 5, that's when it sort of sometimes it out traded you, and then if it was going in your favour, that's when the speed came out and they'd start avoiding your actual army and just going to objectives and scoring points.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, for Harlequins have definitely not gone, and I think they can do that to a lot of factions. Harlequins, as you say, they were never a durable army, and going from 4 to 5 up save, yeah, it's big, but they also got some other stuff back, didn't they? They got the -6 back on the ranged weapons that they can do and some other things.
Yeah.
So I think skilled players are going to pull them out the bargain. Maybe they're not going to go 5-0 so much, but I think we'll see a lot of 4-1s out of them, to be honest. I think that's probably still going to be on the cards.
Yeah, because so for example, my events this year, the biggest ones I've been to, I've had two 5-0s and 2 4-1s, and both my final round losses were both times to Harlequins. And
one was Mike Port as well.
One was Mike Port, yeah.
Any Harlequins, that was
the Harlequin player.
Harlequins, yeah.
But what the reason that the losses came in was, even though, as you said, it felt like in the actual battle I was doing quite a lot of killing, I had way more army left than them. It's simply the speed. They have the ability to make plays to, and that Death Guard don't. And that's the biggest problem learning to play Death Guard, is your ability to impact the game is very much tied to how you pace it. So a Harlequin player can shoot, a troop from 40 miles away onto your back objective because you left, 1-2 little poxwalkers on it. Now they've out-obsect you on it. They don't have to charge, don't have to kill anything. Now you've lost 4 points in your primary. And that can snowball because Harlequin secondaries are also incredible. And that's what happened. That's genuinely what happened. It was a really, really, really stupid mistake. But when you're playing as Death Guard, you will see opportunities where your opponent's got one model on his home objective, but your Death Guard, there is nothing you can do to interact with that. Maybe a cheeky Plague Burst crawl, but you aren't gonna magically make Plague Marines travel 50 miles and steal that. And again, that's one of the hardness. So I still think if Quins and the good players at Quins won't really care too much about the 5-up invuln, I think they're still going to be a bit scary for us. But hopefully, and the hope is that the change from a 4-up to a 5-up invuln should scare some Harlequin players more than it actually matters, so we might see less of them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Harlequin's matchup is as well that makes it tough, and this makes it tough for all factions, but us specifically, because again we don't have the ranged weapons, is the transports and the troop mechanic, where people are smart, they put the transport on the objective with 5 troops inside, so we have to kill the transport, then the troops get out, and then you've got to have enough long range shooting to then get to the troops as well. So say Death Guard, your list prime example, you run two Plague Burst Callers and 1 Contemptor.
Yeah.
2 Plague Burst Callers have to kill it for the Contemptor to then go into the troops. The Plague Burst Callers whiff because it can be swingy and you don't kill it at all, or they make the saves. The Contemptor then kills the troop transport, absolutely no problem, but then you've nothing to kill the guys inside and they still score their points. And then the next turn they do exactly the same thing with one of the 1 billion transports that they seem to put in all the lists.
Yeah. So next faction we'll talk about, because you're right about that, Harlequins. I think it's still going to be a very, very tough matchup if we get into them.
Eldar as well, actually, in general, they're for a lot of the same reasons. Harlequins, they're a tough matchup again.
Yes.
Plus they're also spamming mortal wounds out their arse.
Yeah, Harlequins, I think, Eldar, Craftworld Eldar, I think are going to be a very interesting one, because their builds have opened up a lot because of Arcs of Omen, the detachment, giving them the ability to basically skip on any troops and just take what they want. It's going to be hard to know how to deal with Eldar until we start seeing some performing lists, I think, because the book has a lot of diversity in it, really, and depending on what they start to lean to as their archetype, Hail of Doom might come back. Obviously, without Armor of Contempt, Hail of Doom gets a lot better again, so we might see a resurgence of that. But you never know, they might surprise us with something like, Mass Aspect Warrior thing, because they don't have to take troops anymore. So I would put them up there as a faction to be concerned about, because again, the speed to play around us really hurts. And their damage output and mortals, as you said, is crazy. But it's hard to put a pin in that one until we've seen, what kind of builds are going to start coming out of them, I think.
Yeah, but with Eldar as well, I think it's also important to mention how the faction plays, because in a competitive sense, Eldar, so they often have a win rate. The win rate, looking, from broad spectrums, can sometimes look quite similar to Death Guards. But when you look at T-Whip, I think it's tournaments in winning positions. So it's basically when you take your first loss, Eldar can often go to that top and go four games in a row, maybe lose it on the last round. what that shows, it shows what the difference in the hands of a skilled player and, an average Joe who picks up the faction, because they are a glass cannon. They're the epitome of it. They're easier than anything else. But if someone sort of plays they control the engagements with speed, and when things do hit, they generally can kill things quite easily. So Eldar are one where even if you look at them and you think, oh, they don't have a very good win rate, it depends on the player. I can never rule them out, because a skilled player with Eldar, it's a completely different game.
It's a nightmare. Honestly, that is a grim one, and a good point to make, really, because it comes back to talking about Death Guard as well. Like, skill beats everything. Like, everyone looks at win rates and can get a bit too obsessed with them, but you're completely right. Skilled players with any faction are, something to look at. If you look at your pairings and you're seeing a rank 1 player for a faction, and I've had, and to be honest, this is sometimes where being a D tier actually comes into benefit for you, because I don't know if you've had games that I've had, Will, where your opponent looks and goes, oh, it's just Death Guard, free win, and then you table them in 3 turns, and they're like, what?
Yeah, they're a bit salty at the end, and they can't believe it happened, and they're sort of like, and then they sort of, how strong's -1 damage, and it's like, well, no, sometimes people, like you say, they underestimate it, don't they, throw things forward, and so often people, specifically don't expect the slap back from Plague Marines, I find.
Yeah,
but
totally.
You're 100% right there, and you more than me, because I know you've got to top tables and play guys who are also other faction specialists and pull the win out the bag. I mean, it must be sort of quite a humbling experience for them, I guess, especially when they sort of come against someone who's as skilled as yourself, and you can sort of show what Death Guard can do, at their absolute best.
So I have a good example for that, actually. When I was in Leicester, I played against Sid Seedu, and Sid's a lovely guy, genuinely. He's the rank 1 in the world player for Imperial Knights, he plays a very interesting list, which is just all Armigers, no big knights at all, and he's been playing it for a while, and he's been absolutely crushing with it, and he's doing really good. And when we started the game, was obviously put against Death Guard, and he told me after the game he's never ever lost to Death Guard before. So he didn't say it before the game. He wasn't a dick or anything like that. He was a lovely guy, but I don't think he'd ever experienced the actual damage output Death Guard can have when stuff's layered properly, because it was turn 1 was pretty quiet. A shot of Contemptor did 4 wounds, nothing. So obviously he was like, all right, I'll go now, just hold him to 0 primary. And he sent all his knights forward. Close. Yeah, he came close, and then the next turn, so turn 2, out of his, I think he has 14 Armigers, I killed 6 in a turn. and touched another 2 in combat, 2 Helverins, so they weren't shooting either. So, and that was a bit of an eye-opener for him. And I again, if I played him again, I very much doubt he's going to be, running it as hard at me. He'd probably play a lot more reserved and back, and that's what he said after the game. But that can happen when you play these weird, underplayed, underrepresented at the top table factions. You can genuinely just win some games because people look at you and think, oh, this should be a free win, and then the next minute you've battered them, and they're like, what?
Yeah, I had a game against. Yeah, I had a similar game against a Blood Angels player, a guy called Keith. He's big in our local meta. I think you've played Keith as well, haven't you? Normally,
just Wilkinson.
Yeah, so
lovely
normally
guy.
if Matt, great guy. And normally if Matt Robinson or Mike Porter aren't there, then Keith's on the podium. But if they're there, then Keith's sort of one of the people. He's either 3rd or 4th place. Keith's one of those guys. And he was playing Blood Angels, and he basically, second turn, he just mobbed me, and he just did loads of damage. And then he didn't realise the slapback you can do if you ended up within 6 inches of Death Guard in the following turn. So my slapback, even though I'd lost about 40% of my army, 60% of my army was enough to take down about 70% of his. And then at that point, because I had the foul blight spawn, sort of tagging things in 3 inches, making it fight last, so I got to fight again in his turn before he did. At that point, it was actually me, who was on top. But that was just because Keith, again, exactly like yourself, we talked about the end of the game, and he was like, if I hadn't mobbed you first turn, I'd have been all over you there, wouldn't I? And I was like, well, if you played how I know you do, you normally play it, Keith, because I know the calibre of player he is. I was like, yeah. He was like, yeah, he just got overconfident. Sort of thought, well, it's Death Guard. It's an easy game here. And so you're exactly right. And obviously your example is a much better one than mine, because it's at a much sort of higher level and sort of I suppose just an improved level. But I mean, talking about that leads us quite nicely into another topic. Then I mean, cause I know what your list is. Obviously, my lists have changed quite a lot throughout the year, but I know you've been quite sort of detailed. I know obviously you did an Art of War video where you've made some tweaks, but it's predominantly the same. But maybe it's just to recap for the people who are listening for the first time, just what you've been running, and then maybe we could talk what some sort of changes are, or if you're going to completely throw that out and sort of build from the ground up. That might be a good segue.
Yeah, so the very first thing was the Art of War one, which was the very start of Nephilim, which was using stuff like a 10-man Blightlord brick. That's no longer what I use. So we'll just go over the current list that I was using at the end of Nephilim, and then we can talk about obviously the changes I'm going to make for arcs and see what, if any. Which, spoiler alert, there are slight changes. So the list I was running was a Lord of Virulence with the mortal wounds on 6s on his flamer. With the wall trait Ferric Blight, obviously inexorable, because inexorable for me is, when you pick your play company, for me it's between inexorable or anvil, but I think inexorable is going to be probably the way to go. I'm about to cough, give me 1 second. Nurgle sends his blessings.
So I'll chip in. I think there actually is a third play company that's good in some builds, specifically teams. I think it's a Feyman, the one where you can extend the Foul Blight spawns out to 12 inches. It's a specific build, don't get me wrong about that, but I think that's actually like a sleeper sub-faction to consider as well, depending on what kind of gameplay you want. If you want to just try and like hold the objectives and have loads of combat stuff that fights first, I say it works better in teams where the scoring, you're scoring a differential and you're trying to just minimise that. But at singles, it's not as effective unless you've really found some sort of some tech.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I forgot about the Ferryman list because I don't play teams that often. I don't think I've played teams once yet. I need to dig onto that. But yeah, Ferryman in teams, it can just blow out some matchups, especially stuff like, if you ever come across White Scars, if they become popular again, But in general sense, I'd sticking with the inexorable. So then I had 2 Malignant Plaguecasters. One of them rocking the Plague Skull relic, which is still my favourite relic, and I will still probably be taking. I had.
It's either amazing or a massive whiff, isn't it? It's either like how many mortal wounds or 2.
It is the highlight of the game when you throw it. You're about to be very happy or very depressed.
Yeah, I concur with that one.
We have 3 units of 5 Plague Marines with all the bells. I'm not going to go into all the detail. All the bells and whistles.
I think the only real difference is we all know how to kit Fiber, but it's basically do you put Melter or Plasma Gun? That seems to be the other one. It's Blight Launcher, Cleaver, Flail, Plasma Gun, and Fist on the Champion. And then, it's just what do you do with the, do you go second Plasma or Melter Gun? Just to throw that in there, because there might be a few people who don't sort of realise what the standard loadout is, but I think anyone who's going to tournaments knows it's that. And then if you're doing a 10-man, what you do with your champion, that that sort of equivalent of. There's a few different options there, but that's really going to find the details and things. But sorry, continue with the list. So
we have three of the 5-man squads. We had 1 10-man squad, and then we went into our elites. So we have a Tallyman with Tollkeeper, who's sitting next to his best friend, the Hellforged Contemptor Dreadnought with the missiles and the Volkite. Kind of a staple. Never leave home without one. Will I be leaving home without one in Arcs? We'll see. We have a Biologist Putrefier, who is the best unit in the entire codex. Please take one. A lot of people I see don't take one, and it hurts me every time.
I would caveat that. If you're going to take more than 10 Plague Marines, 100% take him. There are some builds where you don't need him if you're going to go into like Demon Engines and stuff, because obviously his buffs aren't there. But I think at the current meta, as we're going to probably allude to as this bit unfolds, you really want him in your list.
Yeah. Also, if you take a big Blightlord brick of 10, put him in, because he actually makes them deal some form of damage in close combat rather than just a lot. You get some mortals out of it rather than just one damage swords or axes.
Or Death Shroud on the sweep with 5.
It's so good.
My God.
Even funny if you put the pathogen on the sergeant for mortals on 6s, so every 6 on the sergeant's 2 mortal wounds. It's so funny.
It goes nuts, doesn't it? I've only ever done it in a couple of sort of practice games sort of when the edition came out, because I realised sort of early on it wasn't the most competitive thing, because they die quite quickly, the Death Shroud. But just talking about that sort of the combos you can do with the Biologist Putrefier, there's some good ones in there. But sorry, I keep jumping in.
It's fine. That's what we're here to do. We're here to talk to each other, man. Don't worry. So obviously, then we've got where was it? Yeah. So the Biologist Putrefier had the Figaris Helm and Arch Contaminator, so that give him the grenade buff and Arch Contaminator at 9-inch range. Obviously, if you don't know what Arch Contaminator is, please open your rulebook and read it, because it should be in every single list.
if at this point, if you listen to this podcast, we expect that you kind of start to think about tournaments. So if you don't know what Arts Contaminator is, unless you're taking 2 Warlord traits, because there are some other ones, maybe some Demon Prince builds, but Arts Contaminator should probably be the first on your list. Along with maybe your Plague Companies one if you're going to go for the Inexable and you want the extra AP and stuff like that. But yeah, at this point you should know what that does, because you need to be re-rolling all wounds on those Plague weapons. It is big.
Yeah, definitely. So we had that, we had Taliman, we have... I know I don't take a Foul Blight Spawn, which I know is a hot topic for quite a few people.
Ooh, I know, yeah, we disagree on that one.
We do. I have a unit of 4 Death Shroud, which me and you kind of agreed that 4 is sort of like the sweet number. 3 can sometimes, make a charge but then let you down. Like, even if it's just by like 1 or 2 damage, you have like, Armigers, Helverins, any sort of like stuff like that lives on like 1 or 2 wounds and you just sat there like, great. Whereas the 4th one kind of just, it eases up that damage output, and also it means if you take a loss, you're still swinging pretty decent. Whereas going from 3 to 2 Death Shroud is quite a big hit.
And 5 can sometimes do that, go the other way. You sometimes just overkill things, and that last guy is just, you've just got like 5 to 10 extra wounds.
Yeah, for 50 points, it's not worth.
Yeah, and also if you are going to drop them in, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it actually is. Sometimes the 5th man just making that footprint, that base bigger. Makes them so much harder to place, and it's that, because that's my argument with sometimes where the 3-man could be better just if you're trying to specifically deep strike them for a reason. But for damage, 4 is the way, and I think also probably for deep strike, because 4, it's still quite a small footprint.
Yeah, I totally agree. The most important part of this list is the pathogen on the Sergeant Scythe. So we're going to give him the upgrade to make his Scythe ignore cover. It's very important. Everyone uses heavy cover. But I had like 10 points spare, and I'd rather just give it +1 strength than do nothing with it.
Do you know what? It's a smart bit of tech. It's something that, like you say, you don't really you take that pathogen just for +1 strength, because not only is it good in the smash, also making the sweep +1 strength. How many times are you using the sweep into either toughness 4 down to toughness 3? And then it means you're wounded on 2s, rerolling 1s. So if they are outside the Arts Contaminator bubble, you keep your efficiency. Like, if you've got 5 points, use it, because it's 5 points now on the drop as well. It's one of these ones where people are like, well, you can't use it on a combat weapon, but if you look in the rules, you can get cover in combat. So it is possible, and it's a good bit of tech.
It's a silly little inclusion, but it makes me laugh every time. I always make sure to point out to my opponent to a very confused reaction. So then we have 2 Plague Burst Crawlers, which are a hot topic. We'll say to still include Plague Burst Crawlers.
Yeah, go on, continue. I keep interrupting you. We'll come to this stuff.
Yeah, with the entropy cannons, we have 1 fetid bloat drone with the heavy blight launcher, which is another weird one, but it makes more sense than the Plague Burst Crawlers probably when I explain it. It's not a flesh mower. It's a I need to stay alive till turn 5 kind of thing. And then we have 2 Chaos Rhinos to round it all out. And 10 Poxwalkers, because something's got to sit at the back of your objective.
I think you did miss one thing though. Tallyman.
Oh, did I not say Tallyman next to the Contemptor?
I might have talked over it, to be fair, so it could have been me talking. I just didn't hear it. But because obviously the Tallyman's quite important for you as well. Yes. So Tollkeeper or no Tollkeeper, that's one of the other questions, isn't it, with the Tallyman? Do you have enough to justify it? You have it in your list?
I do have it on my list, yeah. I do have it on my list, but if the Contemptor ever went, I'd probably drop it. But we'll see. But yeah, he's definitely in the list because I start with a whopping 0 CP. So definitely need it.
So one of the things, so I'll ask some questions about your list, because I can give a quick rundown of what I'm seeing in the attachments, but I think your list is more interesting because it's proven, it's tested, it's taken out events, it's gone really well. And one of the things that I wanted to ask, I think you alluded to it there, is, so today we're talking about them because they were, they come as a threesome really, the 2 Plague Burst Crawlers and the Contemptor, and maybe the Bloat Drone does as well, but those 3 to me, they're your fire base. Yeah. At this point, so now Knights are free, and Armour of Contempt is gone, and some of the secondaries are specifically worded, if an infantry, it's a troop, isn't it, or an Armiger or War Dog scores, you get CP. Is this the point, especially with Contempt's cost of CP, where Knights come in instead, or are you still seeing, Plague Burst Crawlers and Contemptors? What are your thoughts there?
So, the Plague Burst Crawlers are really, strange one, because I mean we could talk about entropy cannons, and what happens with entropy cannons. You either hit or you don't hit. It connects, it's really good, happy times. If it doesn't connect, you really sad times. But it's the real talking point for why you take a Plague Burst Crawlers is the mortar. Even with the indirect nerf, the mortar could open up certain things and certain builds. So for example, fleeing vectors, we are secondary, where we want to kill stuff with plague weapons, and we want to get a failed morale check against CSM, which could be quite a tough matchup when they had that big Terminator break that we could out durability does, which was really fun. They'd often have a unit cultist sat on the home objective, and putting a mortar into that every turn had a real high chance of them failing a morale check.
You told me that first hand, didn't you? I remember we had that practice game, and I was like, well, I'll proxy some Death Guards for CSM. I'd like to give it a go, and these could just be guys with Mark and Urgle, and I had some cultists, and you taught me that one first hand. I was very impressed, and I since took it away and sort of copied it to some events, and that was prime example of why the Plague Burst Crawlers got something sort of in there to do. That was really good tech that you found, and I think that's a good example. But I mean, so the entropy cannons are quite funny though, aren't they? You kind of alluded to it. It's hitting on 3s, but only 2 shots, no rerolls. Often realistically hitting on 4s, though, because a good player will use terrain to get the -1. I mean, at this point, obviously the Plague Burst Crawlers, it's durable, it's tough, and weirdly it's quite fast. I've played them before and sometimes put them out as a screen to cloud of flies, plague marines behind them and stuff like that. I mean, do you think there's still play in that, or because obviously the Knights damage output, specific war dogs, especially with specific favours, probably do the damage output better, even though not as durable. What are your sort of thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think with AOC also going, I think the AP4 on the entropy cannons is a bit less valuable now. Obviously people are like, well, why is it less valuable now? It goes clean through a 3-up rather than having a 6-up save. And that's true, but it's not as impactful as let's say Execution in War Dogs, where AP2 goes from them having a 4-up save to a 5-up. That's a lot bigger of a difference than having a 6-up to nothing. Plus obviously way more shots. Plus you can give them I don't know what the upgrade. I know for the thing it's Plunder of Beasts.
Worthy Offerings, I think it's called, because that's the list I've been trying them. It's Worthy Offerings for the +1 hit against vehicles and monsters. But obviously there's now ignoring cover means something, and flat 3 damage. There's going to be a lot of Terminators in the meta. Maybe there's also some sort of arguments around ignoring cover, so Terminators will always be at -2. That's another meta decision. I think the Worthy Offerings, so the +1 hit against vehicles monsters is better, but sort of going on your point, the damage output in the vehicles, in my opinion, that definitely swings. But do you think Plague Burst Crawlers get any other strengths? Because I know you take despoiled ground quite often, and having a Plague Burst Crawler left and right of the in deployment zone, I know that can also be quite useful too, whereas Knights can't help with that secondary.
Well, yeah, that's the problem. When we start talking about allies, we have to think about our secondary game, because it's the other thing that also is going for Plague Burst Crawlers over the Knights is also our new and improved fleeing vectors, because we want to be killing stuff with plague weapons, and obviously, and this is another topic that also comes into a discussion when we get onto it regarding the Blight Haulers, because Blight Haulers, despite being a demon engine, have a spit and a teeth as a plague weapon. It's a multi-metal and a missile launch for the rest. And if we're going to be, I think that secondary is going to become quite staple for us outside of matchups like Knights or something. Because
I'm never sure on that. So just to jump in, on that, if the secondary, it really annoys me how all these other secondaries have been good. Do you know what they need to do with that secondary? Amazing, 7 wounds with a plague weapon.
Yes, that would be better.
7 wounds. If you do 7 wounds to a Knight, all scoring would have been fine, so you got less because it's easy to score. It'd be good in every matchup then, whereas there are some matchups, even say the Deathwing Terminator build we alluded to before, you're realistically not going to kill 7 Deathwing Terminators, and they're probably not going to run away either.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an annoying... you are right, there's matchups like Orcs and probably Guard and some Eldar builds where, it's a good one. But there's so many other ones where it's really situational, but I understand what you're saying, because you take into it, don't you? And this is probably why your results sort of speak better than mine, because I know that's something that you also do. That sort of leads, how do you see the Contemptors coming in as well? Because obviously, do you think they're still worth the CP, or do you think take a knight and get that extra CP? And because again, obviously, it links to fleeing vectors and the lack of, not with the contemptor so much, because obviously it doesn't have it, but just where we're sort of talking about sort of fire bases, what are your thoughts there?
So, just for those who aren't aware, the fleeing vectors was obviously changed recently. Now it is, rather than 2 points for killing 7 models and 7 including plague weapon kills, it's now 3 points. So something being worth 3 points for killing 7 models with plague weapons, which most of your army should have, starts to become quite reliable, especially for Marines or, like, for instance, Dead Guard. Picking up 7 guardsmen, you can do that, by sneezing at them. You can even, if you run Blight Laws, you just turn the bolters into plague weapons for a turn. There you go, you'll pick up 7 with that, and that's going to be 3 points. If they fail morale, bonus, you get an extra. And it can cap out quite quickly, and especially since you score it in both players' turns, not battle rounds. So let's say you did a charge, killed 7 models, and then in their turn they counter charge, didn't wipe you, and then you killed 7 back. You've just scored 6 points in one turn. So it's quite easy to max. I do agree though that obviously against stuff like Knights, Custodies, Deathwing Terminators, I probably still ain't taking it against that, because you could potentially kill 7 Deathwing Terminators, but the commitment to do it would ensure the slapback is far worse than it was worth.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if you're killing 7 Deathwing Terminators in a turn, there's probably better secondaries to be taken.
Yeah, you're probably winning that game anyway, regardless if you're killing that many.
Yeah, that's it. Your secondaries might not even mean anything.
Yeah, and I think the only weird thing about fleeing vectors, and I had it especially versus orcs, because people think it's going to be an easy take versus orcs, but one weird thing that I've noticed versus orcs is orcs go hyper aggro because they kind of have to. In those 2 turns they have water active, and unless you deal with it, you'll get over them real quickly. And I had a game versus orcs, and I managed to max it, but in the last 2 turns, it became really hard because he had nothing left.
You done such a big punch to him.
Yeah, the counter charge killed basically most of his army, and the last 2 turns, all he had left was a squad of Gretchen and a squad of boys holding his backfield, and that's where, again, the Plague Burst Mortars, thankfully, managed to keep making the Gretchen fail morale, which let me max it out.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, more reasons for Plague Burst Callers.
But I think it's going to be quite a good second, especially since the amount of Marine bodies we're going to see now. It kind of depends if we're going to see heavy Terminators or not, because you're right, I wouldn't bank money on 7 Terminators a turn, but I'd bank money on 7 Marine bodies a turn. If we see like Inceptors and stuff like that, you can probably pick up 5 Inceptors, not that tough, especially if you, like, for example, bring the Knights now, because Helverin's into 3 wound Gravis armor, that's oof. You're picking up...
Even a Fleshmore drone, because obviously we'll talk about some of those things. A Fleshmore drone charging 5 Marines should pick them up on average dice again now, whereas when it was Armour Contempt, that didn't necessarily happen. So, if a Fleshmore can kill 5 guys on its own, you've only got to find 2 more guys elsewhere, and it's quite easy to score, specifically into the Marine matchup if it does go down the Horde infantry route, which looks like a viable build, to be honest. It looks like it's going to be one of the builds that are going to come out of this. So going then on to your list specifically, I mean, you alluded to, you think you might make some changes. What are the changes that you think that you're specifically gonna make? 'Cause I mean, and then I suppose we can sort of link that into how it's placed in secondaries.
So I think one of the changes is I'm probably going to drop the 10-man unit of Plague Marines and split it again, because the 10-man unit, the main difference between that and the 5-man units is when you stacked it with stuff like Miasma and Putrescent, it actually was a unit that genuinely had a pretty good chance of surviving being either charged into or shot at quite a bit. But with, especially if you could touch terrain as well, you had quite a good chance of that surviving. You'll take losses, I'm not sitting there saying it's unkillable, but the 10 bodies give it, enough resilience to take a hit. I don't believe that's going to be the case anymore with Armour Contempt gone. I genuinely think picking up Plague Marines is once again going to be annoyingly easy. Definitely not true to Death Guard lore, that's for sure. So because of that, I think we need to start looking at Plague Marines purely as trade pieces. We send 5 out to do something, whether that's, spread the sickness and die, or, trade something in the middle. So like they've got a unit on it, you send it out, charge it from a Rhino. Still think Rhinos are going to be completely required for Plague Marine plays. You've played Rhinos alongside me, that extra 3-inch get out is huge in so many ways. And even
just the movement.
Yeah, it's 100%, because we're such a slow army. Like having that extra 3 inches, it sounds daft, but it makes the world different. Especially if you manage to get a Rhino set up with a piece of midboard terrain, quite safe from shooting. You can just use as a launch platform. becomes very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth mentioning just on the topic of rhinos, because I sort of picked this up from watching yourself do, actually, and sometimes the rhino doesn't ever actually move itself in the game. Sometimes the rhino just becomes a launch point, doesn't it? You put it behind a bit of terrain, you stack your plague marines behind it, and you just fire them out with an extra 3-inch move, so your plague marines are moving 8 inches instead of 5.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can swing a game. And then late game, maybe, you know, they score spoiled ground, you've got one left and one right, or they can push out and screen something. But I've had loads of games where rhinos have deployed in my deployment zone, pushed up against a bit of terrain with marines inside, and the rhino itself has never moved over the whole 5 turns. It's just fired marines into the mid board.
Yeah, totally.
So I think that's something to sort of mention with the rhinos, because I see a lot of people say, oh, why is the rhino died really quick? And stuff, but sometimes the rhino itself, you're not getting the 12-inch move from the rhino, because I think that's a trap. Or sometimes it's right to move the rhino, don't get me wrong, but it's something that people sort of miss sometimes, and they don't realise that 3 inches is massive for us. There are other factions where, maybe let's go back to Harlequins. Yeah, Harlequins getting 3 inches out one of their transport, who cares? Do you know what I mean?
They're already moving like 16.
25 instead of, yeah, you know what I mean? Still moving a silly distance. But just on the topic of the rhinos, I thought that was something to sort of throw in there. Is, you know, one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast to help people and be more competitive, and, you know, sort of talk about, you know, sort of list building and why things are in there. So yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Stop apologising, you sir. You're making some good points. Don't worry. But you are right with rhinos, for example. It's very rarely I actually use rhinos and ever go into the opponent's deployment zone, or, you know, half of the board even. Like, a lot of people who are new to the game think rhinos like are a transport, like as a transport, you know, they drive up into the opponent's zone and then you get out in there. But it's actually very rare that happens. Usually you'll drive either to a mid-board terrain piece and hide behind it and launch from there, or you'll, you know, do it from deployment. You'll be in a good spot to launch onto a point and do something. It's only really turn 4 to 5 I'll actually start moving them out to score Despoiled, because I love Despoiled Ground, which got a buff. So again, we'll get into that in a second. But the only other real use I used rhinos for, which was Cloud of Flies plays. Cloud of Flies is a massively underused stratagem for Death Guard. You've used it, and I've had games where this, let's say they have a Night Crusade, you know, the big Gatling Crusade with all its, you know, mortal wounds and stuff, and you park a rhino in front of it, and then you go Cloud of Flies, and you're like, cool, because that one thing has to choose all its targets at once. You just had a complete blowout. That unit might as well not exist for a turn. It picked up a rhino, and then the next turn you do the same, and you just control that knight all game. It never actually gets to do what it wants to do.
Well, that specific strat's worth mentioning, because obviously you have to be able to see the targets it's nearest visible on is viable. So if the only thing you can see is the Plague Marines and they can shoot them, it's not like the old character rule. But what you can do is say, you know, this is where it sort of comes back to list building, and, you know, obviously like things where if you've got, I think it's a trap, so, you know, we can discuss this, you know, more once you sort of finish running through what you might change to 10 Blight Lord Terminators. If you want to get more value out of them, push them in the mid board and Cloud of Flies again, a Plague Marine squad behind them, so you get their durability added to the Plague Marines. So that's kind of like little plays you can do to get value out. And do the same with Plague Burst Crawlers if they're not sort of staying at the backfield and pulling out of the opponent's sort of guns and things like that. If you're playing something like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an army that would have guns, but anyway, there's plays with that, and you're 100% right, rhinos do that job as well, even better, because they have to shoot the rhinos, but there's a point in the game, isn't it, say maybe it's turn 4, unless they bring it down, you don't care about those rhinos anymore. They're just boxes. Yeah. They're just boxes with tracks that are just kind of, and if they can keep your Plague Marines alive, then that's an extra use for them.
I found them really good at pissing off Helverins, because I Cloud of Flies the Plague Marines, put a rhino in front of it. But always remember as well, when you're casting your spells, like in Will's example there with the Blight Lords, you can have the Blight Lord brick and your Marines behind it. Stack your defensive buffs on the Blight Lords, not the Plague Marines, because obviously you've got to preempt the Cloud of Flies. So what I did on Rhinos against free Slayer of Beasts, you know, the +1 to hit vehicles and monsters, Helverins, was I'd put miasma onto the Rhino, use it to Cloud of Flies, and then when they declared to shoot it, I'd also pop smoke. So I give them -2 to hit to put them back to 4s, and then, you know, the amount of shots they had to put into the Rhino. I think the third Helverin picked it up, and even though the Rhino died, and was like, well, your Rhino still died. It's like, yeah, but it took 3 Helverins worth of shooting that entire turn. They might as well not have existed for a turn for me, and that's what matters sometimes. Just eating shooting up can really be important. Now, tying into the new season though, I will say the Rhino blocking Play's got a lot worse now with Armor of Contempt. It's a lot quicker to pick up the Rhino. Having a 5 up versus a 6 up versus like stuff like, or a 4 up versus, Helverins and stuff versus a 5 up is a big change. So I think there's less value in them in doing that. I still think Rhinos are basically compulsory because 3-inch movement is really why you're taking them. But I think those secondary uses for them still work. Don't get me wrong, but I think you've really got to redo. That's the biggest problem I'm going to have, is redoing the mental maths to know how much this can actually absorb now before it goes pop. Because it's no good if I line it up to try and block 2 nights worth of shooting, and the first one picks it up and the second night shot me anyway. It's not ideal.
So I wanted to feed in as well, because you made the point about the Plague Marines going out the 5 units. One reason again as to why Biologist Putrefy is so important, because a lot of Death Guard players don't actually realise this. With the Plague Marines now, you need to be trading up, and trading up means killing a unit in shooting and a unit in combat, because those Plague Marines are going to die. Trying to keep your Plague Marines alive, there's no armor content, I think is the mistake.
Yes, 100%.
So I think you have to put them forwards, throw the grenade strat. It was Aiden who put me on the grenade strat, because I remember 8th edition grenades and I was like, they're not as good as them, so it's terrible. That strat is amazing, especially comboed with them. Throw grenades into, say, specifically talk about Marines, into one squad of Marines, you'll kill them as long as you've got Arts Contaminator there. Especially if you can play with an Expel and put an extra AP on it, and then charge them into another unit, and you'll probably wipe them as well. And then that 1 5-man Plague Marine unit could have took out 10 Marines, and you up on the trades. And because they're OBSEC, if you've killed guys on an objective, you've hopefully took the objective too and are pushing on their primary. So, it makes good sense why you've talked about putting it the 5-man. I mean, there might, and this is something else I'll ask you, just going back to Marines, is there still, do you think, room for 1 10-man Marine unit to be a hammer? Just to, say someone comes and brings a big knight in the middle objective and you want to take it down in 1 turn, which the 10-man Marines with full round of shooting and combat could often do? Or do you think, Death Shroud have got that role? What's your opinion there?
It's a good point, really. I think, because the thing you have to remember is Plague Marines still did get cheaper. That their unit of 10 is now 20 points cheaper. So as much as it does, and I don't think that makes up for AOC loss. The durability loss isn't equal to the points you save. But I see what you mean. I think, again, it kind of depends what we're going to start seeing. If we're starting to see these, big buffed up units of like Terminators, we might need a 10-man unit just as an answer to that. Just to sit in a Rhino behind a wall, because everyone knows when people play with a big unkillable 10-man Terminator unit, CSM did it, Dark Angels do it, they want to put it on the middle and they want to just hold more and sit there all game. They don't want to push any further into yours. They want to hold free on a 5 objective mission, for example. They want to hold free and then just sit there, hold more, and then score secondaries around it. So you need to have an answer, and you're right, a 5-man Plague Marine unit won't do it, and you can't send 2 in because obviously they'll interrupt. That also does play back into, though, does the Foul Blight Spawn come in for aggressive plays, though?
Ooh, see, this is a contentious topic, isn't it? I know, I like how you dropped that in there. See, for me, the Foul Blight Spawn is a must. I like that you can put the little bubble, put him in one place and go, this bit here, this is pretty much unchargeable. And I know there's counterplay against him. I know the rules is written, you can pile into him, which is why you've got to be careful you've wrapped him properly. But I think his biggest thing is that 3-inch fight last.
Yeah.
I always find that's the biggest thing, more than the 6-inch aura of switching off charges. But I know you play without him, and obviously you found real success with this. I mean, so do you think he comes back in, or do you think you're going to continue without him? Because I think that's a really interesting talking point.
So I think people that rely on the Foul Blight Spawn purely as a defensive aura to just sit around and be unchargeable are people that are wasting his potential.
You're gonna call me a name here?
No, I think because for example, we've had games where you have used your Foul Blight Spawn to be aggressive and tag someone with the 3 inches. I feel like a lot of people forget about the 3 inches and just see him as this 6-inch bubble, which he's not, because you're right, the fight last is immensely important, and being able to do that onto a big unit of Terminators and allowing multiple units to swing in on it is, incredibly valuable. But I think also people that rely on it just for, to stop themselves getting charged, that can be done by other methods, such as setting up counter charges. So I think,
yeah, that's fair.
I think being aggressive with him and using him more as an aggressive tool might actually be the play. Because, obviously he still works as a defensive tool perfectly fine. But I think
also, has to be said, so I know you were just about to add another point in. If we go into Marine meta, don't discount that Flamer, especially with I forget the name of it now. The pathogen where he gets to reroll the number of shots.
Yeah.
That will often. Well, maybe because you can't guarantee you're going to roll a 5, but with the reroll, you often get say a 4.
Yeah.
That'll often take out the best part of a squad of Marines, at least.
Yeah.
Especially if they're charging you, and it's another sort of Overwatch thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
No, I agree, because
there.
I've been using the Lord of Virulence for a while, and his Flamer, the 2d6 one, only 1 damage, not 2, and less AP obviously, but I give him the Mortal Wounds on 6's ability, was fantastic for clearing out stuff like sister battle units that wanted to go sit on a point. You can extend the range to 18. It's quite reliable at just chipping stuff away with its mortal wounds, and I think the Foul Blight Spawn is basically him, but for Marines rather than 1 wound models. He's like his counter synergy sort of thing. You bring the Lord of Virulence for spraying off 1 wound models off the middle. He sprays off Marines pretty easily, and I do agree. And also points drop has happened on the Foul Blight Spawn. We've had a points drop, which does also make him more tempting, and honestly, I could probably start to see him slipping back into my list, because...
Ooh, yeah. There you go, saucy, there we go. I'm happy to hear that, Aiden. I think that's something that you've obviously been making it work without it, but it makes us mere mortals feel like we're doing the right thing by keeping on our list. So yeah, I'm glad to hear he's at least in your thoughts.
Yeah, I think... The thing is, I've never not wanted him on my list. Do you know what I mean? I've never sat there and gone, no, I'd never take this guy. It was always just a question of, is he actually worth it for me, or should I just bring another squad of Plague Marines? But getting the points cheaper, he does just make some matchups, even though there's some matchups that could, like I said, could be beaten just by good counter charges and stuff. Sometimes it's nice to just not even have to worry about that and just have this bubble of lol, you can't touch me. So with the points drop, with the change in armies, and probably possibly seeing, again, it all depends on what the build's going to be for this. If we see a lot of Marine players show up with Terminate lists, just over like, quick side note, the people out there probably listening to us now talking about Marines and stuff, I'm thinking, well, what about Guard, guys? You're not really talking about Guard. I'm just going to come out and state this right now. I don't think we beat Guard. I just don't think it happens.
I actually think that's a very valid and good point, because I think that talks about you, because there's some competitive games where you're best just accepting the loss.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I think at this point as well with Guard, I mean, unless they're, I hear the term potato thrown out there, refer to competitive players who underperform with S tier armies. Unless you're playing potato who's really just doesn't know what they're doing with Guard, or it's a Guard player who played a Guard player in the first round. I think after the first round, you're probably not going to come against Guard unless you also want a good run yourself, and maybe just accept that as a loss and focus on the games that you can win, because base means being a good one. I mean, maybe this is something where as we sort of go on with this and, we go out there and test some lists, maybe we'll sort of find something and think otherwise. But I agree with you there. I think Guard, just accept it as a loss, try and just sort of score as much as you can in those games, assuming you're at an event, and then just to sort of put that in your overall score for your overall finishing event, and just play that way is how I'm going to treat it.
Yeah.
And obviously, once we get in other people, there might be some sort of tech and some, and dice can happen. This is the other thing, isn't it? We talk about this as if like, oh, it's a surefire thing and this and that should happen. It's still a dice game. You could just roll 5s and 6s. Yeah, they could just roll 1s and 2s.
There are some games where you sit there and you could have the best player in the world and you fail a 3-inch charge and you re-roll it and you get a double 1 again. And you just literally sit there. I don't even get mad anymore. I'm just like, yep, dice moment. They just happen. It's just,
Yeah.
What can you do? But I think I said the same thing on the Art of War podcast. I said when NID book just came out and we're talking unnerfed NIDs, and they were asking me what would you do to tech into this, and I was like, I wouldn't. I just wouldn't bother, because you're gonna ruin your list against all the other armies to try and beat an army that you just realistically it's just not happening. I think until we see some fundamental changes to that book, maybe a bit of nerfs and stuff like that, it's just. Kazakin is stupid. The mortal wounds are stupid.
Yeah.
Obviously,
There's
Death Guard hate mortal wounds.
As well, isn't there?
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
the
100% loads.
as well,
Yeah, the Russes, especially since Plasma is the go-to build now, and that's now got AP 4, so no saves on our Plague Marines at all unless we're touching terrain, and even then it's a 6-up, and it's a flat 3, so Diad means literally nothing. So I just wouldn't just eradicate that matchup from your mind. If you get it, unlock, GG, go next.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the way to play it, and I think unfortunately there's going to be a few matchups that are like that, because although Death Guard, we're sort of disputing the Art of War's D tier, we still have to be realistic. We were a long way off S tier ourselves. And the S tier matches are, I think, more doable than what, sort of some people are giving us credit for. I still think there are a few where it is pretty rough. I mean, another one which is weirdly close to Aiden's heart, we do play some other factions as well, is Votann. Like, Votann, they're as slow as us, but the way their shooting works, it's a hard matchup. But I mean, you might think differently here, Aiden, because I know you've got some knowledge of that faction. But to me, there's a few factions that, I mean, I suppose I've had some nerfs, but I haven't actually looked too deep into that. But are there any other factions you think that are like Guard, where you think sort of just accept it's a loss, or do you think it is just Guard at the moment?
I think Votann are going to be an extremely hard matchup. The only slight thing we have going against Votann, which we don't have going against Guard, is Votann points cost for units are ridiculously high. It's the second army I'm playing at the moment, and like making a list for Votann, it looks like a Custodes list. Honestly, it's ridiculously, like, everything's so high cost, and it has to be, because grudge tokens as a mechanic is quite frankly an abomination that should never have been made. It's stupid. Hit auto wounded on force to hit, and then giving him a 1 CP reroll hits. It's just stupid. But I think that would be a nightmare matchup for us, because I think they might start teching into stuff like Grav Cannon and Thunderkin to deal with the Marine Menace. And that has a really bad knock-on effect into us, like Plague Marines, because damage free, again, is not something we want. We could potentially just win that, though, from just having enough models to sort of, like, deal with it. Again, especially if we go with this trading unit, because basically I can guarantee you kill any unit of Votann, you've probably traded up, no matter what you killed. 10 half-kin warriors are, like, 140 base pretty much, and like obviously they might want a railgun and scanner, and that's taken to 170 then for just 10 1 wound models. Plague Marines can pick that up easily. You can pick that up with most things. So I think we might actually have a chance in that matchup just because of uptrading, whereas that just doesn't happen versus Guard. Like, the points cost are too low, the damage output per unit's too high. It is what it is at this point.
We haven't even mentioned the elephant in the room with Death Guard, and they're just shoot mortal wounds.
Yeah, Kazakin just come down, and especially if we're having to lean into MSU, that's like Kazakin's like playground, because they're just going to split those shots and drop every play. Even if they just pop 2 Plague Marines off each unit, that's like, that's almost 50% of the unit's output potentially gone before it's got to do anything. So it does become a problem. But again, let's not get too caught up on it, because I don't want everyone to be like, this is,
there are
nightmare.
Matchups where, like we say, I mean, plus obviously this is the first episode of podcast series we hope to run for quite a while, so we can sort of deep dive things like Guard, and as we get into sort of later episodes, and like they sort of start dominating the meta a lot more, because they still aren't really out there in the real world yet. I think today's or this week's GW pre-order was the announcement
for the Guard next
codex,
week, so we'll see them very soon is what we'll say.
Yeah,
but I mean, the entire point of this first episode wasn't necessarily to deep dive into certain topic. Obviously, we're hoping, like, if you guys are enjoying this, who listens to it, one, thank you for listening, but also for giving us a shot. But if you are, you want to hear us talk specifically about something, please let us know. We'll find a way for you to contact us.
So, there'll be some comments, and we'll have some sort of contact details. We'll get some social media page up as well, so be able to sort of build a bit of a community around sort of what we're doing as the podcast grows, and obviously maybe set up a Discord and things so people can sort of chat with each other and stuff. But to start, we'll be just putting the podcast up on YouTube, Spotify, and hopefully some other places as well. But sort of moving on back to sort of conversation, because obviously we'll probably wrap this episode up sort of soon enough, because obviously we want to sort of keep them quite bite-sized and not sort of, overwhelmed.
Yeah, we kind of kept this sort of like general, like, that's what I mean. We'll get into specifics more, hopefully, in later episodes. This is more just we've been jumping around quite a bit because there is so much to talk about. It's crazy, new season starting. But we will get there, fellas. Just bear with us a little bit.
Yeah. So, going back, because there's a few things I'd like to touch on before we sort of bring this to a close. I think just highlighting a few big winners, a few big losers out of the thing, and then I know Aiden obviously was talking through the detailed changes to his list, and we can go on that more, especially once we've play tested more, and we've got ideas of what list. It might be rather than what you think about changing, we might be able to actually go, this is the actual list.
Yeah, it is hard right now without actually having, because obviously just about to get our book, and I haven't played a game just yet of Arks of Omen. I'm gonna get into it. Hope that should be tomorrow actually. We're having our first game of it. So obviously it'll be better than when I can give you actual feedback, because I could say all this now and it actually turns out to be a load of rubbish, and there you go, you've listened to an hour of nonsense.
So one thing I'm going to I'll run through. I'll try and sort of ping them off you, and then you can sort of respond to me, and I'll maybe sort of expand if there's something you say, but I'll try and let you sort of lead these. So first one is secondaries, because obviously psychic interrogation's gone.
Oh god, yeah.
So is Warp Ritual, is it good? For example, I think if you're going to take it, I think for me you've probably got to put 3 psychics in your list, or a Demon Prince, to sort of try and live through 2 turns. What are the secondaries at the moment? What are the 3 secondaries you think you go for with Death Guard? Obviously Spread the Sickness.
Yeah, Spread the Sickness.
So 2 secondaries. Spread the Sickness and 2 others.
Spread the Sickness is a no-brainer, and here's a free tip for everyone listening. If you're taking Spread the Sickness, the objective in your home, the safe one, that should be the last one you spread. Just there you go, free tip, everyone. But no, obviously Spread the Sickness is an auto take. It's very easy to do. It gets good points. It's consistent. It's nice. Fleeing Vectors, I think, is going to be taking a lot more. Again, really matchup dependent, but I think the matchup dependentness of it has reduced a lot, because you can just get 3 points now just for killing 7. You don't need to force morales. Like, I wouldn't take it if I knew I couldn't get them for fail morale. Whereas now I feel like as long as I can kill 7 models a turn, I should be able to get that. So I think we'll start seeing that taking a lot more. Despoiled Ground got a little bit easier. The 6 inches for table quarters is now 3 inches, which is actually quite a big buff for Death Guard, because we are quite slow. And so I will still be taking Despoiled Ground. The only problem with Despoiled Ground is stuff's going to be dying a lot quicker. So I need to play test and see if I'm going to be losing stuff at such a rate. Playing Despoiled is actually difficult, because there's not much left alive by turn 5. We'll have to see on that one. So that one, leave that with me, that playtest, that one. But I do like Despoiled in general.
Yeah, you've been I go the way on Despoiled, just put the caveat in, because I've always struggled with it. I think because I don't tech into it as heavily, but I have, in the few practice games I've played, I have actually built into it. So I put 2 Flesh Mowers in my list, which is, I'm going to ask you a couple of hot takes on the units, and I think the Flesh Mower is one of the big winners for me, at least.
Yeah,
and,
definitely, I agree on that one.
And I think putting 2 of them in for Despoiled Ground, maybe if you can play the passive game, you don't even bring them out until turn 4, and you just bring them out, or you bring them close to where they need to be. Turn 4, you just fling them both to where they need to be to go Despoiled Ground, and you just hope they live.
Yeah.
If you've gone second, that's quite reliable. Maybe that's also where the Foul Blight Spawn comes in my opinion. You're standing behind the 2 in the place they're going to be.
They can't, yeah.
Someone does want to charge him.
They're going to get
the
flashed
swing,
forward.
and then they can ping out at the end. That was one of the things. So what would be your third secondary? Because I actually thought, going back to your list, by the way, I was wondering, you could drop your Lord of Virulence for Typhus to get the 3rd cast in there and still play a Warp Ritual against armies that don't have Psychic, because we're going to see a lot of Custodes.
Yeah.
We're still going to see loads of Tau. Is that one of the things you might look at Warp Ritual now? Psychic Interrogation's not so strong because you need line of sight for the characters.
Yeah, so for me, Psychic Interrogation's dead. Completely, unless you're against someone that has to throw a character forward, but it's unlikely. The problem being that we don't have the speed to get angles to do it. Like Eldar can, for example, they'll pretty reliably still be able to do
line
it.
Of sight now, don't you?
Especially
just for the people who don't know, you need line of sight now to the characters, and
which really hurts.
Warp cost as well. So people, if you take and hide their characters. So that's one reason. So I didn't mean to cut you off. Okay. I just realised.
So basically, one thing you could do beforehand is, find a character that's not a psyker, stay at max range, cast it out of the deny range potentially. But now, because you're also going to have to get an angle to get line of sight, your chances are you're going to be in way more vulnerable position to die afterwards, and you're going to be in way higher chance to get denied. And it just becomes so messy, it kind of just doesn't even become worth even considering. Like, I wouldn't even think about Psychic Interrogation unless, for example, like I said, they bring something really big that can't hide, like a named character knight. But even again, we've seen games where you take Psychic Interrogation against a guy who's brought, 1 character knight, and he just literally runs it, you turn 1 and says, well, you either kill me and get 0 secondary, or you just let me stomp around your entire base for 5 turns, killing everything. So, I think that's dead. Warp Ritual is interesting. The only problem being, again, I think you're right. I don't think it's the case that you can just put 1 Psyker in the middle and he casts it all anymore, because stuff's going to die. I don't think it's going to be easy to protect him, and I think chances are you're going to lose a Psyker in doing so. So
yeah,
I think.
I mean, I played Tau on Friday, and just again, this is a silly skew, and it was a bit of a test, and it worked out all right. But I had a Demon Prince. I'm not sure on the Demon Prince. A caster which I put in a Rhino to get there, and then I took the favour on a Knight that meant him casting the Knight did the third one.
That's
and
quite cool.
Wasn't bad. Yeah, but it was specifically against Tau though,
Yeah.
so, I don't know if it would have worked against any other army. And again, if you'd have thought about it a bit more and target the Knight that's got the favour, I mean, maybe, I don't know, I think it's, for me, I'm gonna test it a bit more because I'm unsold on it, but just because your list was already you had the 2 casters already, and then you already had a third Lord, I wondered if just paying the extra points to make that Lord Typhus was something.
It could be considered, because I do like Typhus as well. I think he's generally quite a good character. It's just a shame the play company's sort of glued to. I definitely think you need minimum 2 casters to attempt anything psychic, but I think Warp Ritual massively also depends on the one mission, because obviously it's more beneficial if it's a 5-point mission. And also terrain layout, because if there's a nice L you can hide behind and still within 6 of the centre, becomes a lot better. Opponent dependent because of casters. So because there's so many variables, I don't know whether I'd change my list to include Typhus to potentially take it when there's so many variables that already might make me not take it. But again, trying to find the third secondary is a bit of a tough one at the moment. So it's not a bad shout. It might be worth testing with to see if Typhus is worth it. Obviously, I'd have to find someone else to put Ferric Blight on. But again, we might be considering bringing the Blight Spawn back. Be a good target for it there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Demon Prince without wings as well, I have to say, is something that I found in some games. A walking Demon Prince with double claws. I know it's not great, don't get me wrong, but if he's going to be more of a buff piece, sometimes he's not terrible. I mean, I've only ever dropped the sword and the wings if it's just points, and I wouldn't reroll ones and a cast.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I very rarely run that. But it's something that a lot of people don't seem to realise. You can drop the sword to save 10 points, and at 140, it's not a bad package, especially if if there's other things going on with him. But at the same time, the Malignant Plague casters are by far the most points efficient casters in the book.
Yeah.
And then Typhus is all right. I ran him in list, but the problem with Typhus is he's so slow and he can't get out a Rhino. Yeah. If he's got to get within 6 of the centre, sometimes you're relying on an advance, or sometimes you just can't get there. And so there's arguments there for him.
Yeah.
So I mean, so just to recap what you've sort of said, it sounds like you're thinking Despoiled Ground, Spread the Sickness, and then a killy one, maybe it's a psychic one. I'm guessing instead of Despoiled Ground, if it's on the card.
Yeah, it really does depend on your opponent, but I think Fleeing Vector's a lot more play now. If you feel like you can kill 7 models pretty reliably, I think Fleeing comes into play quite a lot more. Despoiled Ground I still think is valuable, especially if we get these heavy elite builds with lots of Terminators, Custodians, etc. Despoiled actually becomes pretty good because they don't have the model count to kill all your units, so it's quite easy to sneak your 4 Death Shroud in the back corner and they just never have a unit to go deal with it. And they can sit there, spread the sickness on a point nearby, potentially charge to kill what's on it, spread, or just sit there and score Despoiled, it's potential. I still don't think I'm taking Engage or anything like that.
Yeah, I have to say I've done Engage a couple of times, but it's only in the one mission though. I forget what it's called. It's the one where you've got the 4 objects on a diagonal in no man's land.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes to hold the 2 fire ones, you're engaging anyway. So
True.
I've took that, but I have to say I've only really had success on certain terrain boards where there's something to hide in those corners, or to play a place terrain, and I can put a piece where I wouldn't.
I think the other thing that can give success to Engage is what you've been doing with War Dogs as well, potentially. But that's a topic for another day. But I do think War Dogs do open up stuff like Engage a lot easier, especially with free strategic reserves and stuff.
Yeah, I think that as well. I mean, one thing, because obviously we'll wrap this up in a sec, 'cause I've got a couple more questions before we finish, but they'll be quicker ones. What are your thoughts on Grind? Because I look at Grind now, and I think because you get the CP for it, and if you're doing damage with troops, aka Plague Marines, which are one of our biggest damage dealers, I do feel like that now, if I think I can get it, I might just do it for that CP farming, but then I think at the same time, is it better just to sort of go for reliable points? I mean, how much do you value a CP, I guess, is the question.
I mean, I value CP quite heavily, but we do have the Tallyman. But the question becomes, does those secondaries become so reliable we can drop the Tallyman, because that's going to save us a lot of points to get another unit in? I think when it comes to grind, it is obvious. The problem I have with grind is if you roll first turn, you're basically just maxed at 12, because it just doesn't happen. You don't get a kill first turn. Most people can hide their entire army. But it's not a bad thing. It's good against stuff like Quins, who have like anyone that, especially since we've seen behind enemy lines actually getting a massive buff. A lot of armies might be playing more with these throwaway units just to score behind enemy lines, in which case grind might not actually be bad, because then you could pick up a free one off the unit they throw away every turn. So I can see people doing like behind enemy lines and engage, and that's just going to be 2-3 units you're going to pick up. So you could actually counter that with a good grind. So it's an interesting one, but I definitely think it is dependent on matchup.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, I think we mentioned this briefly, didn't we? When we were chatting before doing the podcast. For Death Guard, I think behind enemy lines is a trap.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I think. Yeah, like you can take the Greater Bloat Drone 14, move it behind there, then move it again, and then put 2-3 squads of Death Shroud to try and find a little hole, or even put Typhus or another, a character that's on one base. But I think you just invest in points into stuff that you'll score more points by just having stuff that plays the primary.
Yeah, definitely.
I think is don't sacrifice your primary for Death Guard to try and score that secondary. Is my opinion. Maybe someone out there will prove us wrong, and they'll be maxing 15 on it every game.
I agree.
So my next question, and I think I know the answer to this, but it's a hot topic, and everyone who plays Death Guard will be back this. 3 reserves. We're Mortian or we're not Mortian?
No Mortian. I'm just going to put this straight up right now. If your goal is to go to an event and do as best as possible, you need to take as many odds out of luck as you can into your hands, and straight away taking Morty just gives you all these matchups. You come across, like, people say, oh yeah, but you can reserve now versus 3 Hammerhead Towers. It's like, okay, so we're going to reserve him, we're going to bring him on, and then he's going to get shot and die. It doesn't change anything, it just changes the turn he dies on, whether it's turn 1 or turn 3, it doesn't matter. Like, okay, you make a 9-inch charge into some Fire Warriors and then you get blasted in the face. Like, it doesn't change Morty's biggest problems, which is he's a big unit, costs a lot of points, and it's just too easy to kill units like that these days. And if you get unlucky, or especially if Tower now going to become a main one, or like we see Iron Hand's mad shooting lists, and you bring Morty, if if your Morty survives past turn 1 without strategic reserves, or past the turn he comes in with strategic reserves, I will give you 50 quid. I will PayPal you 50 quid.
I tested him one. He might owe me 50 quid here, but I've tested him a couple of times. One game I brought him in, and the game plan went perfect. Because I thought, you deep strike him, you bring him in, but you'll set him up so people try and screen him. You can use, they're going to have unit 10. You can use it as a launch point, get Marines. Tried it one game, worked perfectly. Tried the second game where someone thought about it a bit more. They just screamed me right out more in the coming on deployment zone anyway, and then he got shot. So I was like, well, I had that one game where it was good, but then I had another one where I went pretty badly, and then I realised, no, I'm not going to do a third one. I think
if you're trying to get a 5-0 or a 4-1, just don't take Morty, because it's just, you could potentially do it. We have seen Morty go 5-0 before, but like, you are putting you're definitely relying on a lot of luck and fate rather than your own skill more.
Yeah, certain matchups and making 4 saves and 5 have been up pains, you're right.
Yeah.
And then I suppose the last one before we sort of bring it to a close, Terminator spam. I think that's the other archetype that some people will look at. For me, I think it's a trap. I think we might live forever, but we'll have really short range, and you won't get to anywhere on the board to really compete with anything, and some armies just pin you in your deployment zone. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think I'm wrong, right, or do you think that's the build? I mean, I've seen people talk about it.
Okay, so I think you're right. I think it is a trap, mainly because, okay, so we're talking about Marines potentially doing the Terminator spam build, and they just do it better. Dark Angel ones can also get -1 damage. They have Transhuman. They have all the free war gear in the world. Like, our Blight Lords just don't hit hard. So you're already outmatched there. Like, there is an army that does that but better already, so that's not a point going for it. But also, like, when I played 10-man Blightlord Brick, it was tough, and it was tough because of Armor of Contempt, and it was tough because back then when I was playing it, there was less damage in the game. That's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
You can kill Terminators. Blight Lords do not last as much, especially mortal wounds. Still, we have no answer to that as an army. You're not taking the 6 up from the Plague Surgeon. Be honest with yourself.
Don't that is a trap. If you've never done that yet, if you really want to like make yourself sad, take it. I tell you what, if you want to make yourself the saddest person in the world, go to a five round event. Play 5 rounds him. After the first round, you'll be annoyed by him, and at the end of the 5th round, you'll feel like you want to just stamp on the model and throw him in the bin.
Yep, he's terrible.
He's frustrating because you never roll 6s, and if you do, like it's never at a time when it matters.
No, you'll take a melter gun shot for 6 damage and roll 3 6s there, but it doesn't matter because you're still dead. You roll the 6s when you don't need them every time. So yeah, no. So mortal wounds being prevalent, Votan exists with just auto wounding you with like mad AP and damage, and it's just not the way I think we have to do the trade ups, because Blight Lords also just don't do enough damage. Yeah, and Blight Lords just don't do enough damage. Blight Lords just don't do enough. Even with all the war gear you can give them now for free, you just look at what they're bringing and Loyalist side for their Terminators for less points, and you're just like, yeah, it's not even a comparison. Like, you just can't win those games because they're just going to outvalue you so hard. Whereas Plague Marines are mega cheap and do hit up way harder. It's kind of stupid, and as much as they can't survive anymore, that's where your main output is still going to be. So yeah, I don't think Terminator spam. I think Terminator spam is how you beat 1-4, 2-3 players. I think Terminator spam is one of those where it just pub stomps, but the second you come across someone that has a brain and knows how to deal with it and also maneuver around it, you just kind of sit there in a blob, do nothing, eventually get whittled down to a point where they just commit and kill you.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I tried it at a team tournament a while ago, and it was alright, but you just found you couldn't get anywhere. And you can deep set the Death Shroud in, but if people know they've got to deal with the Death Shroud coming in, they screen it out, 100%. And then when they do come in, it is easy to get to 3 or 4 bodies if that's what they're focusing on. And yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, I can't think of, I suppose the Demon Engine build is the other one, and I know some people find success. I know especially in America, and I have to sort of put this caveat on for the UK versus America meta. In America, they play with different terrain. They play with a lot of like hills and stuff, don't they, that you can't move or see through, that everything has to go around. So I'd see people use Mephitic Blight Horse to like block off the space.
Yeah, it doesn't happen over.
Because in the UK, we're all ruins. You block off the space, the infantry just move through the middle of your demon engines, and then your demon engines can't get around the building to get back that infantry. So maybe in certain terrain formats it's a good idea, but they don't hold the primary. I still think
demon engines don't hold primary. They don't score any of our good secondaries. I think it's just that's a list where you just want to go and try and table someone, I guess. But like the second you get a matchup that's just not going to let you table them, they're just going to beat you on secondaries. Like, so you come across an army that has good secondaries like Quins or something like that, or anything now that has like even remotely decent secondaries and good primary, you just lose. Doesn't matter if you table them, you're just not scoring.
Yeah, I agree. I have to say, I've seen people out there have success with them, and when you dig into them, especially if you see it on stream, it's usually on certain terrain formats where you can make a wall of flesh, I guess. But on the UK stuff, at least, obviously, hopefully people around the world will listen to this. We have just tables of ruins. Seems to be what we've decided we're going to go with in our tournaments, and people just infantry walk through the walls, and they use, it generally, in my opinion, it doesn't work. I mean, it looks great, it's fun, and who doesn't want to run big smashy monsters? But I think Plague Marines have to be the core of the army at this point. And when you look at the lists that win, that generally sort of, the results generally back that up.
I agree.
But yeah, I mean, that seems like a good place to sort of call it for this first episode. I mean, sort of talking about sort of stuff, sort of recapping on what we maybe want to do in the future. Obviously, we've been quite broad in this one, and I think going forward we might sort of dive into specific topics. For example, we haven't really talked about the new formations and, how to sort of utilise them. For example, you can just take one HQ now. Do you do that? What HQ do you take? But I mean, that can be topic for a whole podcast. And also we might get some other people on, if someone does really well at an event, we might sort of get them on to talk about how the event went, how the list went. assuming it's not Aiden, because hopefully he's on there every episode, but hopefully some other people out there doing well. But I mean, is there anything that you want to add in there, Aiden? Anything I've missed, or you want to sort of throw into the mix as well?
No, just obviously, if people have anything they want us specifically to dive into, please let us know. We will be diving into a lot of stuff. We'll be making some example lists, going through them sort of things, talk about our first games of Omen that we're going to be playing, hopefully this week coming up. I know it'll be mine. I don't know if you're played or if you've played some already, Will, but we can talk about those kind of things. So yeah, just let us know what you want to hear the most, and we'll try and do our best to provide. And I hope it was a decent little listen to. Obviously we don't go too in depth this time, but we're just getting started and we want to know what you guys want to hear about.
I think I say everything that Aiden said. Well, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully if you've enjoyed this, you'll tune in and continue to support us. And obviously, if you have listened and you've enjoyed it, especially if you've listened on Spotify, YouTube, please, like, subscribe, hit the notifications button, and hopefully we'll see you next time. I mean, anything you want to add before we go there?
No, just get out there and start kicking ass with your new D-tier army, everyone.
That's it, yeah. Prove them that we're not D-tier.
D for Death Guard.
That's it, yeah. D for Death Guard. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Will, and thank you for listening, everyone. We shall see you the next time on Disgustingly Resilient Podcast. Name is a work in progress. We might change it. We don't know.
Yeah, that might change.
We'll see.
But yeah, thank you very much anyway. See you later, guys.
See you later.